Why in the world do worship team members just not show up prepared for rehearsal? Like they don't know their parts and stuff. That's what we're going to be talking about in today's video. We're going to be talking about 3 ways that you can make sure to motivate your worship team to be prepared when they come to rehearsals. Coming up. Hey, Spencer here from leadingworshipwell.com, your daily dose of practical worship leading tips. If you want to find those tips, head over to Instagram or Facebook at Leading Worship Well, where I'm posting new worship leading tips every single day. But you're here on YouTube, so go ahead, hit subscribe down below, and let's get into it, because today we're talking about your worship team not being prepared for rehearsals. You know the story. You send out the song list and then you anxiously await your worship rehearsal, and you're like, man, this is going to go so well. People are going to show up, they're going to know their parts, right? Or maybe you understand that that's not the case at this point. And you show up to worship rehearsal and people come and they're like 15 minutes late. And you wait around for that person to show up, and then you're like, okay, guys, let's run through this first song. And you start to run through it, and you realize people don't know their parts. They don't know what they're playing. They're staring at their sheet music, and you got to run through parts over and over again. Your worship team is not prepared. If that's ever happened to you before, let me know down in the comments below. In fact, leave a comment below on a scale from 1 to 10. How prepared would you say your worship team is? Like, a 1 is like, we're learning songs at rehearsal because nobody's taken the time outside of rehearsal to actually learn them. A 10 is like, people know their parts 100%. We run through the song once and we've got it. Let me know in the comments below, scale of 1 through 10, how prepared is your worship team for worship rehearsals? Interesting. I hope that you left a good mark down there. If you didn't, I'm going to teach you how you can motivate your worship team to actually be prepared for worship rehearsals. So let's get into these 3 things that you can do to motivate your worship team to be prepared for worship rehearsals. Number 1, and most of these have to do with you, by the way. It doesn't have to do with your worship team. These are things that you can control that communicate things to your worship team. And the first thing that you can do to motivate your worship team to actually be prepared for rehearsals is for you to have a starting and ending time to your worship rehearsals. I talked about the importance of that in this video right here, where I walk you through the complete outline for a great worship rehearsal. So check out that video if you feel like your worship rehearsals are lacking. But do you have an official starting and ending time for your worship rehearsal? I feel like most worship leaders, they have a starting time. They're like, guys, worship rehearsal starts at 6:30, so be here at 6:30. And then people show up at 6:45 and we wait around and waste 15 minutes of the rest of our team's time. But that's neither here nor there. Do you have a starting time? Most people have a starting time, but do you have an ending time? Are you like, okay, we're going to start at 6:30 and we're going to be done at 7:30 or 7:45 or however long you think it will take you for your worship rehearsals? That ending time is just as important as the starting time, because that lets your team know how much time they have to accomplish what they need to accomplish. There's this thing called Parkinson's Law, which says that the amount of time that you have to complete a task is how long it will take you to complete that task. The amount of time that you've given yourself to do a task, for instance, prepare for Sunday morning worship, the amount of time you've given yourself is the amount of time that it will take, because that's all you have. So if you're giving yourself an hour and a half to get prepared for Sunday morning, people are going to know that they have an hour and a half to get prepared for Sunday morning, and they're going to put in the work outside of your rehearsal time because they know that they need to do that in order for everything to fit in that hour and a half. But if you don't have an ending time and it's just open-ended, well, that task is going to expand like indefinitely, and you're going to have these 3-hour worship practices where nobody's prepared and you're learning songs during rehearsal because people haven't put in the work ahead of time. So make sure that you have a starting time to your rehearsal and an ending time so that you communicate to your team, hey, we've got an hour to run through these 4 songs or whatever you do, or we have an hour and a half to run through these 4 songs. Make it something that you feel like your team can do. It might push them a little bit, and then let them know at 7:30 we're done. Like, we're going to wrap things up and stick to it so that people see that they've got to put in a little work outside of rehearsal. So that's tip number 1. Have a starting time and an ending time to your rehearsals. The second way to motivate your worship team to come to rehearsal prepared is for you, once again, this has to do with you, is for you to have a plan for your worship rehearsals. The plan that you have for your rehearsals shows people how important you take preparation for worship on Sunday. So if you have no plan and people show up and they're like, Spencer doesn't know what he's doing and he's just kind of like fumbling through his own music and he isn't prepared and we're just like kind of floating around and wasting a lot of time, we don't have a plan. What that communicates to your team is that worship rehearsal isn't that important. And number one, they aren't going to be prepared when they show up because they see that it's not as important as you think it is. Or number two, they're not going to come at all because they realize that this isn't important, so I don't need to show up. And maybe instead of not coming prepared, they don't come at all. So have a plan for your worship rehearsal. Make sure to check out that video. I'll link it in the description below where I walk you through a complete 5-part worship rehearsal that's going to set you up for a great worship rehearsal. That's in the description below. Definitely watch that if you haven't checked it out yet. That's going to raise up this idea of the importance of your worship rehearsal and how you communicate that to your team. But just make sure you have a plan. So I want you to think, do you have a plan for your worship rehearsals? Like when people show up, do they know what they're doing? Are they like, okay, we're going to spend the first 15 minutes hanging out, maybe doing a devotional, praying, then moving on stage, running through our songs, praying again for our Sunday morning, and then we're done at the official ending time? Do you have a plan like that? Because that communicates to them that this is important and that they have a role in that process and that they need to be prepared to fulfill that role. And so have a plan and stick to it and let people know that worship rehearsal is important, not just through what you say, but also through your actions. Finally, number 3, the best way that you can motivate your worship team to be prepared for worship rehearsals is to get them what they need to prepare well in advance. I'm not talking like sending out the set list the day before rehearsal and then complaining that nobody's prepared whenever it's rehearsal. Let's be honest, sometimes we do that, right? If your rehearsal's on a Thursday night, don't send out the set list on a Wednesday. Like, at least make it at the beginning of the week if you can, like a week in advance, to give people plenty of time. And know your team too. Like, if they're beginner musicians and they need longer to learn some songs, be obedient to that and give them 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever they need to be prepared. Like, be sensitive to your team's musicianship and then get them what they need and think about what they need, because it might be different for different teams. Some worship teams, like, you can just send them the song names and they'll be good. They'll figure it out. Maybe you've been leading with them for like 10 years. You've got this process down. People know what they need to do. Maybe they need chord sheets, and so you send them chord sheets a week out in advance. Maybe they need like a recording to follow along with, and you want to send them the tracks that you're playing with on Sunday, whatever. Just get them what you know that they need. And if you don't know what they need, then ask them. Like, if there's somebody on your team who is not prepared regularly, ask them, what can I do to help you be more prepared? Like, what do you need from me that would make the preparation process easier for you? And then you'll know what they need. And then you send it to them every week and they'll be like, well, Spencer is actually getting me what I need to prepare in advance, like a week or 2 in advance, so I can actually prepare. And then that's on them. Sometimes it's our fault. A lot of the times it's our fault that people aren't prepared for worship rehearsal. Either we haven't communicated that rehearsal is important, or like I said, we haven't gotten them what they need to properly prepare. So before you start blaming other people, look at yourself and ask, have I done everything that I can possibly do to make sure that my worship team is able to be prepared for rehearsal? And then if they aren't, what do you do after that? Well, you keep encouraging them. And let's talk about the final thing here. I said there were only 3 steps, but let's talk about if they still aren't prepared. So what do you do if your worship team members are still not prepared for rehearsal? Well, you address it. And you go up to the person in private, not in front of the whole team like, Johnny, why are you never prepared for worship rehearsal? But you take them aside and ask them that question that I talked about before. Like, hey, I noticed that you have been like having to learn your parts during rehearsal. Like, what can I do to help you be prepared for when you get here at rehearsal? Do you need tabs? Do you need sheet music? Do you need whatever? Like, be accommodating to them and give them the benefit of the doubt that maybe you haven't provided what they need. Ask them, maybe like, see if they say that there's something going on, like they've had a really busy week, or there's a job transition that they're going through and they don't have time to prepare. Be gracious to them and say, okay, like obviously you still want them to be prepared, but say, okay, well, maybe you take the next few weeks off because I believe in preparation, you know, like hold people to the expectations. Talked about that in this video right here. Like, hold people to high expectations. That's okay. That communicates the importance of the position. But if somebody's too busy in their personal life to prepare to lead worship, then they probably shouldn't be leading worship, because leading worship is a high responsibility. So hold them to that high standard, those high expectations, and that it communicates the importance. And if somebody's really busy in their life, they might appreciate a week or two off so they can get things in order, and then they can show up and be prepared for rehearsal. So that's how you lead a worship team to be prepared when they come to rehearsals. If you want to lead your worship team even more, one of the ways you can do that is through worship team devotionals. And I just wrote a devotional. It's coming out on Monday. It's called We Are All Worship Leaders. And it's all about this idea that everybody on stage on a Sunday morning is a worship leader, from the bass player to the keyboard player to the auxiliary percussion player to the background singer. Everybody on stage is a worship leader. And if we can raise up that understanding, I think it'll lead to healthier worship teams. So that's coming out this coming week. There's a link to this launch list down in the description below. When you sign up for the launch list, I'll send you a free devotional for your worship team to start this conversation that we are all worship leaders. So sign up for that in the description below. And other than that, thanks for joining me today. Until I see you in the next video, keep leading worship well.